So if you have an embroidery machine, no matter what size hoop you have, you always want one bigger. If you want to make a big embroidery, no matter what size hoop you have, you can. You want to do something big? You want to make a big embroidery? Well, the secret is a tiled embroidery. That's what we're going to explore today on Sewing Tech Talk. I'm Cathy. Let's get started. So we have a pretty nice giveaway for today's video. We have a design pack that is a heart tile scene. Every time you like, share, or comment, you're entered for a chance to win. There's 4 different styles of hearts, and it's for a hoop 5x7 or larger. So every time you like, share, or comment, you might have a chance to win, so good luck. So this is the first thing you need if you're going to be doing a tile scene. You need a design pack that's designed for doing that kind of an embroidery. So if you look at the back of this packet of design pack, you can see that each one of these hearts consists of 4 different hoopings. And there's 4 different styles that each consist of 4 different hoopings. So what we're going to talk about today is some strategies, because once you get them embroidered, you kind of have to sew them together. So I'm going to talk to you about how we're going to do that after we get some embroidery going here. And I want to talk about supplies when we get started. So basically, you probably figured it out. A tiled scene, it consists of different hoopings. So this is one, and the bigger your hoop, the bigger you can do the individual tiles, meaning you can get a pretty large, significant display of embroidery. This is a quilt. You can also do quilts this way. Each one of these was a separate hooping, and yes, you even do the piecing within the blocks. So it's a pretty cool way to get something going. So you're going to need a design pack, and you're going to find one that fits your hoop. Generally, a 5x7 hoop or larger is going to be where you're at. Although there are some out there that are designed for a 4x4 hoop, if that's what you got to play with. So you need that. Now, each design pack that you get that's a tiled scene is either going to have instructions that you print out. So I printed out actually the colors that go on the individual tile scene that's going to be embroidering on the video today, and they do have a step-by-step guide. So this book came with a design pack already printed out and everything, and it literally does take you step by step with pictures. So for every individual project that you're going to do, check out those instructions for sure, because it might be slightly different than what we're going through today. But what I absolutely want is I want a list of the colors, and it's great if they tell you where the colors go in the embroidery. We're going to talk about when we get to the machine too. So that you need for sure. Now, for setting it up to embroider, for this particular design, it wants me to do a layer of no-show mesh. So this is a layer of no-show mesh. This is by Floriani. It's Floriani no-show nylon mesh, non-fusible. You could use the fusible if you wanted to, although we're not going to be doing the fusy part. And when you go to the handout section, I have a handout for each of my videos. You go to the description, it's in blue, and you can click on it, and there is my handout for the current video. But there's also a stabilizer workbook there. So if you're concerned or new to embroidery and what does a stabilizer do, it's a pretty great resource for knowing what stabilizer works with what. So this is a no-show mesh, and this is what they recommend in this particular design. I'm actually going to be doing this a slightly different way. So I'm going to be using a tearaway medium stabilizer, and I'm going to be doing mine without batting. Now, if you're going to do it the traditional way, you're going to be putting batting in there because it makes a wall hanging quilt. There is embroidery batting that you can get, and the great thing about this is it's batting with it's two for one. It's batting and stabilizer together. So wouldn't need any extra stabilizer for that kind of batting. So get started with that. That is our stabilizers. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose my threads for my project. And we're going to talk a lot about that at the machine. That's one of the big things that you need to be concerned with when you're doing a tiled scene. Is thread management is absolutely key. So what I do is I take a little piece of paper, some junk mail or whatever, and I make a little collar for each one of my little embroidery thread spools. Could be all different kinds. The reason I do a collar is it's sometimes hard to label spools. Sometimes it's even hard to put a collar on there, but I find that I label each one and I use the name. We'll talk about that when we get to the machine, so that when I'm going from block to block, I'm consistent. Because you can imagine if I'm going from this blue dress here to this blue dress here, and I use a slightly different blue, well, it's not going to flow, it's not going to match. So thread management, key. So a little piece of tape, some paper, and you're going to need some thread to sew it together with. So I'm using an all-purpose thread that matches my background. Pretty simple. And some tile scenes are applique, and I've done a segment on embroidery applique video on that, but you're going to need a nice pair of applique scissors, because you're going to, even if it doesn't have applique, you're going to need to trim that batting away. You'll see that when we get to the machine. So these are the Quilter Select. They have like a micro serrated wave edge, which means that when you cut close, it does a really nice job and you're not struggling with the scissors, because we're going to need to trim pretty close, my friends. And then the last thing is I use a wooden clapper when I press my seams. You'll see that at the very end of the video, because I want to try to get them as flat as possible. And all you garment makers out there probably know about this, but a wooden clapper is really going to be super helpful to get those seams nice and flat. This is an official one, and it has some weight to it, which is nice. At the very least, you could use a block of wood. And what this does is it holds the steam in when you open up that seam. We're going to talk about that more at the end. And of course, an iron. So we're heading over to the machine, but what I want to show you is, get this all out of the way, this is the one project, and this is for, I'm going to make a pillow out of it, and I've done each of the panels. These two have already been joined together. You can see I have some pins there, and this is what I'm going to show you when we do the pressing to get it nice and pressed down. On the back of it, this has batting, and this is the traditional way a tiled scene, they like you to stitch it, with some no-show mesh stabilizer and some batting. Now, the one I'm going to make at the machine is I'm not using batting at all. I want to make a big panel that fits into a quilt. We're going over the head of the machine and we're going to see that. So I'm just going to use like some stabilizer on the back. What stabilizer do you choose? Well, it depends on your design. A denser design, you're going to want a heavier stabilizer. That's why that handout book is so important. So this is the basic principle. I've yamma enough. Let's head over to that machine. I'm going to be using the Baby Lock Vesta, and we're going to make a pretty sweet little heart. Not quite this big, but I think you're going to find that it makes up big when we sew it together. So here we are at the machine. We're using the Baby Lock Vesta. Now the Baby Lock Vesta has it comes with a 5x7 and a 6 1/4 by 10 hoop. So what we're going to do is I'm going to be doing, for my project, I'm going to be doing the square tile that's a little bit shy of 6x6. So naturally I'm going to be using the 6x10 hoop for that. Now there's a 5x7 hoop that comes with it, and I'm just going to show you that to show you a way that they really want you to do it. What they want you to do is they want you to use this no-show mesh and have a piece of batting on the inside of it. I'm going to do mine slightly different. But there's some things we need to do before we dive into the embroidery. And like I said before, when it comes to a tiled scene, thread management is key, because these are meant to go side by side. They're meant to touch each other, and you want, of course, the same color flow to go from one to the other. Now, most designs, they're great. I have come up to some where the colors from in the next panel coming over, you kind of have to watch them a little bit. So we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But so my first step that I always do is I print out, write down some way I need to have a map that each one of these is going to stitch out with, especially with the colors as they come up in the order that they're going to come up. So when I'm doing the tiled scene, you know, the one might start with blue and then go to red and pink, and it might go to pink, red, or blue in the next tile over. It just depends on how they embroider out. So what you're going to need is you're going to need to know exactly how they stitch out. So an embroidery machine can truly be your partner when it comes to this. I'm going to show you what it is on the Vesta today. And like I said before, you could do this with a 4x4 hoop if you have a smaller machine. Many of those machines, however, have a like a black and white screen, right? And it's much smaller. So the Vesta is uniquely placed pretty much so that you can do this project more easily when you have a machine that first and foremost shows you the colors of the designs that are coming up, of the parts of the designs. You can see the colors, you can go through the list, actually see a color and see the name of the color that machine shows it to you. And then when we get to embroidery, you'll see that it shows you a little thumbnail kind of image of where this color is going to go. So this is how I start. When I bring in my design, first I find all the designs that go with this project. So there's 4 different embroideries for this heart. I brought them all in. There's multiple sizes on the jump drive. I don't want to accidentally do the wrong size, right? So I bring in all 4 and I put them in the memory of the machine. I know they're there. I know that when I pull one up, it's going to be the next one, because I don't want to do, if it's A, B, C, and D, I don't want it accidentally 2 A's and waste some material. So that's the first thing I do. Then I bring up the design, and here's the design brought up on the Vesta. Now, what I want to do, this happens to be on 4 3/4 by 4 3/4. It would fit in that 5x7 hoop. I'm going to touch the color chip on the right over here, and you can see that there's that first color. It's just going to be a square. That's going to be our placement square for where we put the batting if we're going to embroider this out the traditional way. If I hit plus, it's going to show me the next square, and this is going to be where it stitches down the batting. I don't know if you saw that, but this is going to be slightly smaller square than the first one. What's the next color? The next color is back to that big square, and that's where we're going to be laying down that background fabric to stitch it down. So those colors, they're different, but it's not that big a deal. You're just going to stitch them in a color that matches your background fabric, obviously. Now, here's where it gets to the important part. I'm going to go plus, and you're going to see that the machine is going to show me where that color is going to go and the name of that color. Now, I want to go into settings just for a second and show you how I set up the machine to make this process easier for me. So when I go down to the settings of the machine, I can have it display the frame. That's great. But when I go over to this next screen here, it shows me where I can bring in different color palettes, and I can either have the name of the color or the number of the color. Now, I find names easier to remember than numbers. I might get a 2514 mixed up with a 2541. I bet you have too. So I like to keep it on the name of the color. I also like to pick a set of colors, a color range. If it's colors that I have, that's great. But I think you'll see in a minute it doesn't necessarily have to be. So I could be with the traditional embroidery colors, which is the basic set that all machines kind of mostly come out with. And this may be a different name than what the design pack lists as the next color. Why? Because sometimes thread companies and design companies, they go together. This company might design for Robeson Anton. This other company might design for Floriani. It just depends on the relationship that design creator and the thread company has. I'm going to use my thread colors. They may not all be the same style, or they may not all be the same brand. So here's what I do. They're going to list their colors. Great, no problem. I just take my pencil and I change the machine over to say whatever thread palette I want, and the name of the color, I say OK. Now, as I bring up these individual colors, it's going to tell me what color that is. If I want to change it, great. If I don't want this to be medium gray, I can make it red. But remember, you've got to change that for all the different tiles, right? You might get confused because there could be a lot of colors. So here's what I do. I write down the color that it wants it to be. I'm going to either stitch that in medium gray or whatever, and I'm going to label my thread whatever the machine thinks it wants to have. So this is my medium gray. It's a variegated orange. I've labeled it medium gray. So I know that whenever the machine comes up and says medium gray, this is the color I'm going to use because I've labeled it. Jot it down, label your thread. Let's see what the next color is. Dark mauve. Now, like I said, I can change it in the machine, or I can just pick a thread spool and label it whatever color I want it to be. Because quite frankly, I did different colors than they used in the whole design. Write it down, mark the thread, go on to the next one, the next one, the next one, and the next one, and I have a basic map of what I want to go. So to me, that makes thread management just a little bit easier. Now you can go in, like I said, and change all those different colors because the machine will let you do that. And it'll let you see what you're going to have. Just remember, you got to match it from tile to tile. Sound good? Cool. So let's go on back to just the way it came out of the CD on the design pack. And we're getting ready to stitch it. So I've labeled all my thread colors. I'm ready to go. I've hooped up a piece of no-show nylon mesh stabilizer. It's just going to hold that batting onto the hoop. So I've stitched it out. Let's go to edit in. We don't need to do that anymore. And embroidery. And I've actually stitched out that first color. So on this machine, I touch this and I can go to the very next color. Okay, now it's ready to do its next color in the embroidery. Now that's pretty cool, right? Because if you don't want to do this, if you don't want to stitch any particular color or any particular segment, you can simply go past that in the machine. Don't have to stitch it if you don't want to. Remember, make your embroidery yours. So I'm going to stitch this the right way, the way they want me to do it. I'm going to stitch out that first outline. That's going to be the outline of where I'm going to place my embroidery batting stabilizer. I'm going to put it on there. Now I've used a contrasting color so that you can see. I'm going to be using some red. But I would be using the same color that I use in my background fabric. So there it is. I brought up the design. I'm going to lower the foot. Green means go. So now when I want to stitch this batting down, all I have to do is press that green button. Now, I want to make sure it's lying nice and flat. There's a trick that I've showed you before, but I always want to show you again. When I start to stitch, I kind of want to make sure everything's straight on there. So what I do is I hold down this button, and if I keep it pressed, the machine's going to stitch pretty slow. Why do I do that? Well, I want to make sure nothing is shifting around. When I'm sure everything's going good, I'm going to let the ponies fly. It's going to stitch it around twice. If I want the same time, I don't necessarily have to do that. So I'm going to clip my threads. Now, if I didn't finish this whole thing, this machine is great. Why? Because I can go on to the next color. So all I have to do is come here, go down to the next color, because I didn't finish this one. I didn't have to. Okay, and it went on to the next color. But I have some work to do. I need to take this out and use some applique scissors to trim very closely around this edge, so I only have that piece of batting. Now, I'm not going to be doing that in my project, but I want to show you what that looks like because I'm doing it for that other pillow project. So here's what it looks like. Here's the two pieces being sewn together. And I think you can see what you do is you sew that piece of batting. There's the stabilizer and then the batting on the top of it. And then you trim very close to that stitching. This set of stitching is a little bit smaller than that first outside line. And when I do my next stitch down, which stitches the background down on the top, it makes sure that that line is a little bit out. Why? Because I don't necessarily want to have that batting in my seam. It makes for a bulky seam. So that's why you're going to trim that away. Pretty clever, right? So, but you'll need a good pair of scissors to get in there close to do that. So what I'm going to do is if I'm going to continue on with this, I trim around that outside edge, go ahead, put it back in the machine, lay my piece of background fabric on the top. Remember that batting's been trimmed. And when I stitch this down, I'm going to not trim it for sure because it's my big piece of background fabric. And then I'm going to go ahead and continue on with the design. At this point, it's kind of basically just like any other embroidery design. But as we go through the process, I want to show you something key. So that's how that one would get started. Let me show you my other little project that I'm doing, because I want to make this to insert it into a quilt. So here are my quilt colors right here. These are my little blocks. I actually used AccuQuilt to do a whole bunch of different 6-inch blocks. And I used this fabric. And I wanted to do an insert of this heart in the middle of all these blocks. Pretty cool, right? Doesn't look anything like the picture. Where's that picture? Where is it? Here it is. You sew it on black background. It really comes out different. So there's that half of the heart. You can see I even made myself notes right along there, right? So what I did is I simply hooped up my background with a piece of tearaway stabilizer. This is going to be pretty much like a traditional embroidery. But that means I don't have to stitch that batting down. So you guessed it. I can go through and I can come to this part right here and just stitch that part down. Now, you might be saying to yourself, do I have to stitch that part down? Because I'm not using the batting. Well, yes, you do. Because this official line that you're going to be stitching down, that is the line you're going to use to match these two together. So let me go to this embroidery that I'm going to do. I have it in the memory of the machine. Remember, I said that's kind of key to put it in there. So here's the memory. And this machine, I can remember stuff to the memory of the machine. I can have it on a little USB jump drive, and I can send designs also in wirelessly from my computer. I would touch that icon for that. But I put it in my machine. There's the one that I'm going to be doing. I'm going to hit set, and it shows me the size. Double check to make sure it's the right one. Set. There it is. Now, I'm going to do that outline around the outside edge. I'm going to do it in red so that you can see it. But in my real project, I'm going to be doing it in a matching color. I'll still be able to see it when I'm matching, but if I accidentally miss a little bit, it won't show. So let's go to edit. And remember, I've gone through and I've written down all my colors so I know what's going to be next. Edit end, embroidery. There's that first color. Don't need it. There's that second color, don't need it. Now, I really need to stitch this outline. I should stitch it in black, but I'm going to show it to you in red. Let's go. Lower the presser foot, green means go. Remember, it's going to want to stitch it down twice. I don't necessarily need that. I'm just using it as a guide. So I'm going to use my scissors that come on the machine, and I'm going to advance to the end of this color by using the plus sign. Go to the next color. Okay. Now it shows me that this medium gray right there is going to be that part of the design. And I'm getting a little bold. I watched one of these stitch out when I did another project, and I thought I could try a variegated thread in this. And it turns out that it looks really cool. Look at how it changes colors. Now this is all supposed to be one color, but I used variegated thread and I get a whole rich palette of different oranges. Let's thread up the machine. Take off my little collar, and I kind of store it right up there so I remember what I'm stitching. And put the thread on the machine, follow the path, oops. And I push the lever on the side, boom, it's threaded. Now I'm ready for my first color. Lower the presser foot, there's a button to automatically do that. Green means go, and it's going to stitch this first color out with my variegated thread, and it's going to look pretty cool. So this is my last block I need. I'm going to go ahead and stitch it all the way through. Then when we come back after it's done stitching in 39 minutes, we're going to talk about pin matching and getting everything to match perfectly, because that's the key on a tiled scene. You want them to match perfectly, and that's super important. So let me get started on this. I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about matching the threads when we come up to the sides so that everything looks perfect. And let's go. So now I've switched over to sewing because we have to sew these together. Now while you're stitching, what you want to make sure to do, say this is the one I'm stitching, right? As you come up and you're embroidering it, and when you come up to the edge, and you can see that an embroidery is going to be on the edge, and you can see that in that little window that I showed you, remember? As you're stitching it, keep one that you've stitched previously handy, because it's going to join on all these sides, right? As you're coming up to here, make double sure that this color is going to be the same as that color. Now you're following your little bands, you're taking precautions to make sure everything matches, but you don't want to do all this stitching and have it be the wrong color. So keep what you've stitched previously, and when you see something is stitching close to the edge, double check the color. Now let's join these together. So we're going to join these with a method I call pin matching. And so what you're going to do is you're going to take these two, they're going to go together, and I'm going to take a pin and I'm going to find the biggest unit on this whole embroidery. So here's that big flower, here's the back side of that big flower. I'm going to take a pin and I'm going to put it right next to that stitching and right next to that big unit. I'm going to find that on the other piece and stick my pin in. Now I want my pin to go straight through. Now normally when you put a pin in, you scoop it like this, right? I don't want to do that right now. I'm going to take another pin, put it to the other part of that big unit. That would be right about in here. Sometimes it's helpful to have like 3 or 4 hands. There you go. And I'm going to come down here, stick it through there, right? And I'm going to stick those, and I'm going to take these little pinchers that I was born with, and I'm going to pinch that really close together. And now I'm going to take another pin, and now I'm going to scoot it while I'm pinching that. If I was to have taken this pin and gone like this, what happens is that kind of scoots that edges off. And I don't want to do that. So I have matching thread in the machine. I'm going to do that to all the different elements, as many pins as I need. I'm going to take them out as I sew up to them. But first, let's make sure everything works, right? It's not easy to take out close stitches, but a basting stitch is perfect. So on the Vesta in sewing, I'm going to go over to my basting stitch, which is right here. You can see because the stitches are really big. I'm going to go up to my settings. Now, it has them 20 millimeters apart. I'm being kind of precise here, right? So I'm going to take that down to 10 millimeters apart, and it's still going to hold it together, and I'm going to see if this works. So, okay, I'm going to come on in, do all my pin matching. I've done that on my other piece because I knew you were coming. I put all my different pins in and all the different parts I'm going to match. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch just inside of that line. And it should work out good. Now, my basting stitch come up to the extreme left. I can change the position of it too. I'm okay with where it is, but besides changing the length, I can always change the position as well. So I tried to stitch with the basting stitch just inside that line. And it looks like I didn't get close enough. Now remember, I would normally be stitching that in black. You can see the little gap right there. I need to stitch it a little bit closer. That's why the basting stitch is key. It helps you to find that perfect sweet spot so that you can tell and it looks like everything's continuous. So a basting stitch is exactly what you want. So I think I need to take out that stitch and baste it again. I'm going to do that a little bit later. Let me show you how I would press this. We're going to push the machine back so I can give you a visual. So here's my magic pressing surface now. I have my little iron. Now this isn't necessarily, this is a steam iron. I don't necessarily have to use steam in it, but there's my little wooden block. Remember, I can use a wooden block or the clapper. I wanted to show you quickly how I would use these applique scissors. They have a bill on the one side, and that's the side that goes against the fabric. So as I'm coming up here, I'm going to take them, put that down, and do some little clips and rest it right along that edge. See if I can get pretty close. Pretty neat, right? I come in, I trim up everything, and I wanted to show you the back so that you can see where those two rows of stitching are. Now, I needed to stitch between basically those two little rows. So I'm going to baste it again and see if I can get it better, but that's exactly your sweet spot where you're going to go. Now, let's iron our two pieces together. Now, if these were stitched, and clearly they're not, but if these were stitched, everything would be matching. And these are the ones that have the batting on the inside. So on the wrong side, after they're stitched, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my seam. And I'm going to take some Best Press or some water, and I'm either going to use a steam iron or some moisture, give that a spritz, have my block handy, and I'm going to press that seam open and then quickly lay the block on the top of it as it dries. What the block does is it helps to hold that moisture in, and as it cools, it helps set that fabric in place. So I should get a nice flat seam. Now, if I was doing my traditional project, what I would do is after I've done that, all my little tiles will be sewn together. I'll lay this on a piece of backing fabric and stitch right at the ditch in that same matching thread color. Whew. It's a lot of work to do, but I think the result is going to be pretty fantastic. So thank you for staying with me today. I went on a little long. I'm sorry, but I think the results might be worth it. I'm going to shoot it off to George. Remember, an embroidery machine that converts to sewing, the Vesta, big enough to do a pretty big block. I think it's a nice machine. Take it away, George, because I think that there might be some big wall hangings in our future.
Thanks, Cathy. Once again, that was a great presentation. Don't forget to click on the link to download Cathy's guide on that incredible project. Now, every once in a while, a machine's introduced to the industry that really offers high performance at a great value, and that's the Baby Lock Vesta. Not only is it a great sewing and quilting machine, but it also is an incredible embroidery machine. The embroidery features include a hoop that's larger than 10 by 6, and it has a wonderful color touchscreen. And look at this beautiful embroidery. Plus it removes the jump stitches, and it even has a special software program that sends your design via Wi-Fi right to the machine. Now, that's not all though. For a sewing machine, it has the automatic fabric sensor that senses fabric from heavy denim to sheer fabric to working with elastic or even a ribbing on a collar like a t-shirt knit. But quilting features, it actually will sew in different directions. We have some designs that are incredible for going down the sashing border. It has an automatic 1/4 inch so you can do your piecing, plus all kinds of wonderful decorative stitches. So as you see, this is an incredible sewing, quilting, and embroidery machine. Now, we have a very special buy on this machine. This machine has a manufacturer suggested list price of $59.99. But right now, it's on sale for $39.99, and we're including free shipping across the country, as well as interest-free financing is available. I want to make a very special offer for those who are watching Sewing Tech Talk with Cathy, and that is with a mystery bonus. Why is it a mystery bonus? Well, I don't have a lot of them, but I want to make sure those who are contacting me, all you have to do is mention Cathy, our Sewing Tech Talk with Cathy, and I have this bonus value that is incredible. So give us a call at 1-800-865-9664 and discover how easy it is to get an incredible sewing, quilting, and embroidery machine. Bye for now.